Kia ora koutou. Hello, everybody. I believe we are now live. Fantastic. No mai, haere mai. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. No mai, haere mai ki tēnei wā, ki tēnei whare wānanga. It is wonderful to have your attention. It's wonderful to have you on this wonderful call, this kōrero this evening, where we unpack Indigenous-led digital futures. We have some wonderful speakers with us today, but before we get into introducing them, I'd like to just briefly take you on a bit of a journey as to how we got here today. So this is the sixth in a series, sixth of six in this wonderful series around indigenizing design. We have covered a whole host of different design kaupapa, from Indigenous storytelling to ecological development, sustainability. We've looked at gamification, art form, storytelling, the whole spectrum of Indigenous practitionership, craft and storytelling. And it's been a really wonderful journey of exploration and learning thus far. A lot of the themes that seem to keep cropping up are themes of interconnectedness, interdisciplinarity, the fact that Indigenous peoples typically see the world through interconnected lenses, not necessarily silos. And these all sort of help to shape us, shape our lens of the world. And so it's been a really wonderful series to unpack lots of different future-focused initiatives whilst looking back towards our ancestors for guidance. Hoi anō, enough of that. Ko waio, who am I? He uri tēnei no te atiawa ki Waikawa, e tipu ake ahau ki te taitokoro no Pakaraka, e noho ana ahau ki te whanganui atara, ko Lucy Shan tōku ingoa. Kia ora koutou, I am one of your co-hosts this evening, this morning, this afternoon, whatever time it is of day where you are. My name is Lucy. I am, and my people hail from the top of the South Island of New Zealand. So I have Māori ancestry on my mother's side, and a bit of a smorgasbord of general European scattered across my whakapapa as well, my genealogy. I am a design practitioner, service designer, do a few other bits and bobs, and I have the privilege of being one of the co-hosts on this wonderful panel today. I would like to hand over to my wonderful co-host, John Moore, to introduce himself.
Kia ora, thanks Lucy. And I'm just going to start by saying I probably don't look much like the photo on the promotional panels and the social media advertising that we've done for this series. At the last minute, unfortunately, our regular co-host who's been leading the series all the way through, Keita Twist, one of my colleagues and dear friends, is not feeling too well today. So I've just dropped in at the last minute. Yeah, we'll be hosting alongside Lucy. Ko waio, ko John Moore tōku ingoa, kei tangata tiriti te iwi, kei whanganui atara ahau, kei dera hau a mahi ana. So my name is John Moore. I'm one of the founders and co-creative directors at Indigenous Design and Innovation Aotearoa. I have had the amazing fortune to work alongside Lucy at IDEA and alongside Keita, who can't be with us today. The role that I play here at an Indigenous agency as the only non-Indigenous person is really just to try and work alongside and create space for incredible mahi to happen. So that will be my role tonight. Wanting to hear the voices and the incredible experiences of our panelists. I will ask them each to introduce themselves now. As I do so, oh yes, sorry, Lucy.
My apologies, everybody. In my eagerness to get us started on this wonderful conversation today, I completely, I lost my brain and I left it behind. And I wanted to start us off and ground us with karakia, or traditional Māori blessing, to open the space. And just got way too excited because I'm so eager for you to hear this wonderful discussion. Hoi anō. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta. kia mā taratara ki tai. E hiaki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. And back over to you, John.
Kia ora. Thanks, Lucy. Good save. As I ask each of you, our wonderful panelists, Carolina, Daniela, and Fetu, to introduce yourselves, I'll also get you to answer one of the questions that we've kind of workshopped over the last couple of weeks with our panelists, which is what your aspiration is for the future, and what kind of digital future do you envisage for your mokopuna, your grandchildren? So I will hand over to you, Carolina, and let you introduce yourself. Kia ora.
Thanks, John. First of all, I want to say thanks a lot to just be here and join this panel, this exciting discussion. So, well, basically, I am a Peruvian artist and researcher. I am based between UK and Peru. And what I explore is culture as a subject, always in dialogue with technology. One of my main mediums is textiles, which I approach it not just as a craft, but much more like a sensory interface that connects nature, technology, and culture. My research process is very interdisciplinary, so I draw from humanities, sensory studies, and indigenous knowledge. So at the same time, these perspectives are informed by contemporary practices. So this allows me to reflect not only in the beauty of textiles, but much more in the power relations. So the interaction between ecologies, technologies, and the environmental impact of extractive operations. So my exploration began with a dialogue between textiles and politics, and pursued through collaboration with indigenous leaders and communities. And this was quite key because it convinced me about the power of the intercultural knowledge in order to address global challenges. Today, I continue this journey and I bring together those interdisciplinary strategies with much more artisanal textile process. And about your question about my aspiration for the future, I think that I envision a digital space where everyone feels truly represented, and a place where talking about data, algorithm, and AI feels natural as talking about weaving cultural practices on storytelling. So I think in this place, traditional knowledge is not lost, but reflected in contemporary tools, connecting our past with technology. Because technology, I think, play a vital role in order to preserve and revitalize culture in the way how we are sharing it, preserving it, and teaching, teaching the different types of knowledge, languages, and practices.
Kia ora. Thanks, Carolina. I'm just going to pass over to Daniela. If you could introduce yourself and perhaps answer that same question as well. Kia ora.
Yes. Thank you so much. And thank you, Carolina, for that beautiful introduction. I also want to start by saying thank you to Indigenizing Design and to the people at IDEA in Aotearoa, New Zealand, for this very beautiful invitation to participate here. I have been actually watching the webinar since the start, and I've always referenced Indigenizing Design and IDEA as organizations that I really look up to in your work. So being here is a real honor for me. So thank you for that. And then about me, well, I'm half Costa Rican, I'm half Dutch. I grew up my entire life in Costa Rica, but while being there, ancestry and social justice have always been very strong topics for me, but I had never found the medium to be able to work around those, and at least not in Costa Rica, which is why partly I decided to come here to the Netherlands to pursue a bachelor's degree in user experience design at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. But I also decided to move here to the Netherlands because of my own ancestry. So ancestry has always been very important for me. And it is through finding my own ancestry that I started even questioning even more my ancestry back in Costa Rica, started questioning colonial history in Costa Rica, which wasn't as incentivized through education and just social narrative back home. And I find myself to be a person that really lives by and through my values, and I don't want never wanted my professional practice to be separate from that. So as a user experience designer, or I like to frame myself better as an experience designer, I want to focus on bridging and creating tools, creating spaces for different ways of knowing, in this case, indigenous knowledge or ecocentric knowledge or more than human knowledge, to create opportunities for everyone to create the futures that we all are going to live in the near future. And some things I like to approach to my work is reflective learning. I don't like to create one size fits all solutions. I don't like to individualize problems. I like to see problems as manifestations of broader and more complex systems of interconnected problems. Yeah, and for my future and for my grandchildren, I think what I want for the world is what I want for my grandchildren, is to live in freedom and to live confidently of their identity and their values, and for them to see representation of their voices in the big media and not grow up and think, oh, I have to adapt to these standards or these frameworks of being, but rather have space to live their own livelihoods and just be themselves as fully as they can. So yes, that's a little bit about me. I'm gonna pass it on to Vetu now.
Kia ora e hoa, kia ora koutou mā, ko ai hau, ko Whitu Taku Ingoa, he tamaiti o ngā iwi ki konei ki Aotearoa, Rarotonga, Samoa, Scotland hoki. Who am I? My name is Whitu. I'm a child of some of the iwi here in Aotearoa, as well as Rarotonga, Samoa, and Scotland. I'm very glad to be here, and as with my my friends here, I'd love to give a warm thank you to our facilitators and the people who have brought this, the organisers that have brought us together here. You guys have done a wonderful job in the previous webinars, and I love that we've been invited to be a part of this as well. And I can't wait to see the future webinars that will be taking place and what those conversations will bring, especially since a lot of the technology that we see today is accelerating very fast. And so I imagine next year there'll be a whole new suite of topics to discuss and conversate about, and the impacts that we have on that technology, and the impacts that technology has on us as Indigenous communities and peoples. So what do? I am a member of my community, my Indigenous community, who spends, I live on the land of my ancestors, and I spend most of my time trying to find ways to ensure my tamariki, and so therefore my mokopuna as well, or my grandchildren, are able to stand strongly in their Indigenous identities, in a world that not only has a history of causing separation between our peoples and our cultures, but also has a future for them that is, in my mind, becoming increasingly more potential filled, with a lot of the work that our people have been doing over the last couple of decades here in Aotearoa, in education, and raising the conversations and values. And I'm trying not to use a lot of Māori words because it'll get lost on the audience here. But the values and the practices and the culture, the tikanga, kawa, and whatnot that help define us as Māori people and as Indigenous people. So yeah, definitely want to see my mokopuna, my grandchildren, move into their future with a sense of strength, of identity, about who they are, how they connect to the world around them, how they connect to their families and communities, how they connect to the lands that they exist in, and how all of those relationships will help guide them going forward in the futures that they choose, which I have almost certainty, I have no idea what their future is going to be. So the best I can do possibly is provide like a strength of identity, so that when they do go into that world that I have no understanding of in the future, that they can go into it with, you know, a really strong set of tools. So I use game design to get there. It's just a method. It's just like Carolina was saying, you know, with weaving, whether it's weaving or textile arts or Daniela's work with UX and UI, these are all methods and materials and mediums that we choose to sort of express these goals. So I'm really thankful to be part of this kōrero, and wonderful to meet everyone here tonight. Now, yeah.
Kia ora, iho. Thank you, Whetū. Yes, it's really inspiring to hear each of your various visions or aspirations for the future, because in a world that can often feel so negative and bogged down by all the different kind of geopolitical things that are happening, all the different ecological crises, it's important to have hope, and it's important to have a vision of a place that we want to get towards, because without some kind of guiding North Star, we can become aimless. So having a direction, having an aspiration is vitally important. And I love the fact that each of you kind of reach into these themes of our grandchildren understanding who they are and having such strength in their integrity and their indigeneity, and being able to really celebrate who they are and where they come from, and have that kind of that bedrock of strength. I'm really interested now to start to get towards how we might be getting there. So, Whetū, I'd like to pass the conversation back to you, and Ihoa, and I'd like you to explore with us how your creative practice or how your mahi is contributing towards this future that you aspire to.
Yeah, so I work with Mojang and Microsoft developing content for their platform Minecraft, and then also work on some AI tools for game development in general. And between those two spaces, I've been able to find, I guess, a language to convey some of the challenges that we have as Indigenous people to our non-Indigenous families and allies, and maybe even you know, our non-Indigenous opposition, but in an attempt to like bridge some of those gaps of understanding about what it means to be Indigenous, and some of the conversations around indigeneity and the loss of context between, you know, the concepts that we have and the concepts that are known in the Western world. So when we talk about things like, you know, nationhood, so when you often hear Indigenous people talk about they're a nation, you know, it's very different to, say, statehood from the European landmass, where statehood is, or nationhood is kind of, you know, cloaked in the sense of like acknowledgement from other nations and having a governing body and et cetera, et cetera. And just being able to speak to our younger people about that is like really important to me. I can speak to them in a language that is a little bit more abstract, which makes it a little bit easier for me as an Indigenous person to have those conversations. But also I can put some challenges out there to a group of, or a demographic of people, our young people, who are really hungry for you know, for challenge. They're really hungry for a change in the world. And as much as I see our generation, which is you know, from the 90s, I'm giving my age here, and 90s into 2000s, coming through and fighting, you know, really strong fights. I do see there's a challenge there for our tamariki, but I'm hoping they don't have to have the same level of, you know, friction, and they don't have to have the same level of you know, getting back to stage one, getting back to square one. And so that's with my game work as well. I'm delivering to our Indigenous tamariki and children and youth and teenagers, hoping to give them a sense of pride in who they are, and that their Indigenous cultures and their likenesses can be seen in big gaming platforms around the world. And then just briefly on my AI work, as we all know, AI is sort of storming through technology centers around the world and industries around the world. I'm really sensitive, and we can speak on this a little bit further. I'm really sensitive to the fact that technology has been used very much in the past to separate us from our land, from our cultures, from our people. But as Indigenous people, we've also managed to adapt a lot of those resources and technologies, to help strengthen our peoples as well. And so I see AI as being one of those kinds of things, right? It could equally disenfranchise us more, increasingly more from our culture and people and lands, but it could also, handled with care, help in other ways. So very sensitive about that. And so I think for me, the best way to tackle that is just to be involved. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I love how you having hand in it, and also inspiring storytelling and communication is the only way that we can bring people along and towards these futures that we seek. That sort of got me thinking very much about weaving storytelling. And Carolina, I wonder if maybe you could like to bring in sort of some of your creative practice and how that stems into this vision that you hold for the future.
Oh, thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I think that for me, sometimes it's like textiles is seen very detached from digital as digital medium, but it's very interesting way how textile can contribute to this planetary discussion. Because from one side they involve our hands, the digits, and the other side they engage with high level of mathematical thinking. So that relates with what media archaeologists said or call digital culture. But what is fascinating is there is not just one, there are a plurality of digital cultures, and many of which don't separate the material from the virtual. And textiles, for example, are both physical and cognitive. And they involve hat making, but also abstract thinking. And I think from one side, the hands, for example, if I'm going to explain a deep that part, I think making of textile is related to all this haptic experience that is rooted in the circular production. So since growing fibers from the seeds, raising animals, collecting plants to dye, so every step reflects time, care, and relation with environment. And I think, for example, natural dyeing can take years to just get the exact color that you want. And it's influenced by the type of water that you use. For example, if you are using top water or you are using seawater, so everything has an impact. So this is I think I see that like a gentle reminder, the reminder of the complexity and the holistic nature of this process. But also I want to talk more about the mathematical thinking, and maybe we can use one of the slides the first slide. The second slide then. Yes, that one. Thank you. So it's like this, for example, this is a quipu, that is a device used over the Inca Empire. So these devices were far more than tools for counting. Gary Burton said in 203, for example, he proposed that they function as a complex 7-bit binary information system. Information that was encoded through a series of binary choices, for example, the type of knot, the direction of the spinning, or the color of the cord. And this means that this quipu represent a system of abstract thoughts that went well beyond numbers. What matters here actually is not the material, but is the relationship between the core, knots, and sequence. And I think this is key because that shows us the indigenous relationality, a flexible device that could be reinterpreted. Because unlike written text, for example, here in this keyboard, you can tie and untie the knots. So you can rearrange the knots. So this shows us a very nonlinear way of thinking, much more closer to process-oriented on knowledge. A knowledge that you can see in the right figure. You can see the quipu kamayo, that is a person who are able to read the quipus at that time. So that shows us that it's a device which is portable, wearable, and alive. So it's like a totally different, no, to how you can conceive archives, for example. And I think from those bases, I see textile in a very relational way, an holistic way. And in the next slide, this is one of my, if you can change the, yeah, perfect, thank you so much. I think this is disobedient craft, and it's one of my projects. I think that allowed to visualize how I try to break the idea of how we can understand textiles from the flatness and more utilitarian way. For me, it's much more like this kind of interconnected system where all the layers are created movement, deep, and space. And it's much more like a body. And we can see that in the next slide as well. Besides of that, I think memory and identity are often described not only in text and data, but also in gesture, materials, as cultural practices. And I think in the next slide, please. In 2023, I did this installation that I entitled Writing of Lost Bodies. In the next slide, you can see the video. So basically the project is, I try to translate data from the Memorial of Human Rights and Land Defenders who had died worldwide into a tactile sensorial medium, drawing on the tradition of the indigenous communities themselves. So basically the circuit works in the same way, no? The data is sent to monitor which place each death in its geographic space. From there, a signal goes to the robotic hand, which grabs a wooden surface in a very gesture of care. So every 12 minutes as well, a short animation appears. So the work itself also connects to the ancient practice of tattooing as a healing technique within humans and other living beings and the environment. So at its core, the project is about haptic sense, the power of touch. So touch not only produces awareness of the space and the presence, it can also become a very strong medium for healing, remembering, and caring for nature. So something that I really think that what does this installation is embodied archive. The robotic hand doesn't just represent data, it's embodied memory and in a very tactile way. So writing of lost bodies, that is installation, speak about the memory inscribed on bodies through gesture, not only through text. So this installation became like a kind of rewriting of those lives in a very haptic and sensorial archive. So I visualize or I envision, as I said before, like a technology can help us to revitalize this culture by using touch and movement. So the project reanimates knowledge and mourning praises, translating abstract data into a more felt experience. So finally, I think that the robotic hand here becomes both a vessel for mourning, but also for care.
Wow, that was amazing. Thanks, Carolina. It's like the robotic hand was almost like a metaphor for this, this kind of the ghost of AI that sort of hangs above and around us. But I love how connected it is to that traditional knowledge as well. And I think there's a real kind of something so tangible about the work that you're doing. And I think for you, Fetu, whilst you're working often in a digital realm, it's with some quite kind of a tangible interface as well. So I just thought, Daniela, if you could maybe talk a little bit about your creative practice as an experience designer, which maybe seems a little less tangible, but how you might kind of respond to the nature of the work that Fetu and Carolina have just shared.
Yes, of course. That work was amazing. Thank you so much, Carolina, for sharing.
Thank you.
A question that really came to mind, and I wrote it down, is you talk about how the process of weaving, it can take years just to find the right type of color. You don't know, like it could be with seawater, it could be like with sweet water, etc. And there's just so much intentionality and thought and just like groundedness behind this whole process of creating meaning that is so grounded in identity. And I know I have to talk about my own practice now, but I just want to ask this first. And how do you think, and also Betu, how do you guys think that we can bring like this sense of like effort and intentionality and process on a digital realm that just seems to be going so fast and like the deadline is always yesterday or 2 days ago?
I will go first then. Yeah, I think like in terms of time, yeah, it is always problematic. I mean, textile in the, yeah, my field is much more artistic way, no? And even like even we textile people has different venues, can work with architecture, can work with fashion industries, can work with museums as well if you are an artist. So I think that time is always the bad boy because like even fashion system is much more faster than museums. But for example, how you can teach people about sustainability and land rights if you cannot talk about time of production. You cannot even prepare in 6 months something that is related to specific colors, because you need to take into account the time that takes nature to produce something. So I think that we need to start to teach about that. No, like I say, like do you know if, especially I don't consider that if someone is researching about textiles in general, don't conceive the how where the materials came from, how it's produced, is connected to what you are doing. It's not really something that is talking about textile or in a very critical way. I think that ethical part is key.
Yeah.
And that is why the speed, I think, but it's Betu said before, no, that we need to reimagine like this kind of how these industries or the technology is just moving fast about. And I mean, I always have problems because the way how we work is like through commissions. And so commissions for galleries or commission with another companies, even for company dancers. So everybody, even though like they don't say it, when we are talking about production, it's totally different. The discussion is you need to actually speak up about like everything that we talk about in the academia is like in the real in the real work is like when it's the real battle.
Yeah.
I feel it for myself. I don't know what, or if you have a similar experience with too.
Yeah, it's, what you were saying. Thank you very much for the question too. But Caroline, you were saying about the weaving works that were digital, and that was really awesome for me to see and hear. So one of the thoughts that I had coming into this was that like our design is not just language, but it's like the codification of our knowledge bases, and therefore it's like it's part of the teaching and training of us as human beings in our cultural spaces. And it's it's, with that being said, like how do you codify that kind of knowledge into a piece of design in a week, in a day, in 3 weeks, and then on top of that, like the codification of that knowledge base and that conversation culturally doesn't have a deadline. Like your work you were showing us, a beautiful work, Caroline. I imagine that someone has to like step into your life and ask you to stop, because you could continue forever and ever, in that space of design and creativity. And as a designer, I think we all suffer the burden of perfection over product and whatnot. But equally, as Indigenous people, I really want to point out to all of our whānau that are listening tonight and that hear this, that Indigenous peoples, we have a connection time memorial backwards, and so we don't have a sense of when something started, and so it's very difficult for us to like conceptualize when something ends. Like it's not in our mindset to think about when we're going to leave New Zealand, or when we're going to let go of our land, or when we're going to, move away from our families. These relationships that we have with all those spaces have always been here. It's very difficult for us to understand a world where where there's some kind of, so speaking very directly to the question about how do I manage time, especially I'd love to speak to how we do it when we're speaking with partners. They will often ask us, can we have this at this time? And I often say to them, look, if you want just a product, sure, we can do that. But if you want Indigenous conversation, then you're going to have to wait the whatever time it takes to get that information brought into the design and work that out. I think, John, you talked about it earlier too, about making space. As an Indigenous person, I actually have to make space for other Indigenous people as well. And I think that's an important role that we all play with each other. So hopefully that speaks to the question you asked, Daniela.
Yeah, it does. Sorry, I changed my role here and I just started asking questions instead of answering them. But this is actually like a really good transition into what the slides that I shared, if we could go into them. Yes, thank you. So yes, of course, well, UX UI design is it's a much younger field and it's very tech driven. Like the gist of it is user experience design and user interface design, which basically just, that's why I don't like the term user experience design as much. I like experience design much better, because I feel like with the word user, we're just standardizing the person to just being a user, to being a consumer, to being like an exchange. Like I feel like the humanity is very lost inside that term. And user experience design in itself goes very aligned with the current system that we have, which is capitalism, which is like, okay, building after building after building and keep creating and creating and like upgrading and just never having enough, always having to have a new product, something fresher, something more innovative, rather than nurturing and cultivating everything that already is and that already exists. So with these few slides that I'm going to share with you, I kind of want to exemplify how I have transformed my own training as a user experience designer into my current perception of how to use design for social and systemic change, and of course in this context towards Indigenous-led digital futures. So this diagram here exemplifies the way I was taught user experience design, which encompasses these different lines of thinking, which include information design, design thinking, service design, and well-being design. And in all this, I also received 1 or 2 classes about the role of critical design and speculative design, which basically gives you an input or like an entry point to be more critical about the world, about politics, about systems, about impact of design upon people and communities and societies through the lens of design. But this was always approached in a way that was very artistic, like it was just like a conversation to have, not actually like a tool for actual change. And this is all because in my experience of design, and of course it can be very experienced from each practitioner within their own field, but at least in my experience, it was always about the individualization of problems. So for example, my cases would be like the user has a hard time engaging with this tool, or the user has a hard time learning about, I don't know, this topic. But it was always shown like at the tip of the iceberg, and we were never really taught to like see beyond, like why is this person like having issues? Do they not have interest on the topic? Is there like stigmatization around the topic? Is there like a fear around it? Is it like a cultural thing? Is it a systemic thing, etc.? So at many times I feel like we just created digital solutions that were aimed to create band-aid solutions for very superficial problems. And then at this pace in which the current industry is going, are we ever going to really solve deep problems that are not individualized, but they're a connectedness of so many other problems that exist in so many other fields, and how Lucy was mentioning that this topic is very mentioned in all of the previous webinars, that interdisciplinarity of thing, and how one of the biggest things we must do as designers, as artists, as practitioners is collaborate with other fields, and use our own skill set and other people's skill set to broaden the light towards this conversation that is so pressing for both for society and environment at the moment. So if we go on to the next slide, you can see these are the different subtopics of design that I myself have encountered through my own efforts. So this is everything that I've learned. Well, I wouldn't say I know all of them, but like I've been exposed to through my own initiative and not through academia. So for example, I have learned about system shifting design, about decolonial design, systemic design, open design, ecocentric design, disruptive design, transition design, and all of these, they all have their own frameworks, they have their own set of knowledge, they have their own values, but the common denominator among all of this is that they're grounded in change and tackling issues from the very deepness and the root of it. And then from this, I bring to you guys 9 different potential executions of how this can look like for your own individual fields. So if we go on to the next slide. So the first one that we have is like, okay, so of course in this call we have people that are in very different fields. Perhaps you are a designer, perhaps you have an interest to become a designer, perhaps you just want to create change through your field, even though it has nothing to do through design. I have found that these different lenses are very helpful in how can we bring change with our already existing conditions and frameworks that we're working. So for example, the first one we have is strengthening relationships between diverse system actors. So like, for example, if we're in university or in academia, why are we not being taught how can I collaborate, I don't know, with an entrepreneur or with a psychologist or with an anthropologist to design solutions that create space for, in this case, for indigenous voices to be included in the conversations and the development of technological futures. And then this goes hand in hand with the creating the platforms and the spaces for this to happen. And this can look in so many different ways. Like it could be a collective, it could be a grassroots organization, it could be an online space, like an online blog, it could be weekly meetings, maybe just with your friends or with people who are interested in your community, or it could be directly creating a whole platform that's designed around the purpose of including indigenous livelihoods and voices in conversations that are mostly held here in the West, because most technology is developed and created with Western standards, and then these are like outsourced to the rest of the world, and people just adapt to them because that's just a replication of the colonial and capitalist structures that have been among our world since colonizing times, like 500, 600 years ago. Then we can also create transitional tools to measure new capacities. So maybe we create a new type of data. Maybe we create new KPIs to measure new things. Maybe we create new professions. We create new education programs. And this is where curation and just program design comes really in play. Another ways in which this can look is by provisioning the new system and providing tools to the people that don't have as equal access to these tools. So how do we create tools and resources like knowledge sharing platforms or just like AI systems and make them open source data for everyone to access, no matter their background, no matter their language, no matter their culture, no matter their expertise. Take knowledge outside of academia and just really democratize it for everyone to have equal access and opportunity. Well, of course, finding alternative ways of knowing, which is at the heart of this conversation. How can we encounter different perspectives from Western narratives, and for us to learn and be like, oh, okay, it doesn't have to be this way. There are so many different knowledge bases that we can grab onto, and there's so many people that care about this and have their heart in this direction as well. So like, how do we unite these voices and create from an alternative knowledge base rather than just Western and capitalism and just creating, discarding cycle that we seem to be trapped on at the moment. There's infrastructuring, which is basically creating conditions, standards, frameworks, and basically aligning the actors that have potential to get involved and aligning them to the right emerging practices, to the right path. So, for example, in my case, while I was in academia, I would have really appreciated having an infrastructure or a guide or a framework or just a counselor that saw this potential in me, or at least my interest to use my practice for change and be like, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? Rather than it being like a solo discovery experience that I think many of us that are interested in this field have to go through sometimes. And then the final three ones, which we can see in the following slide, are, and this is something I believe in a lot, which is taking a stand and stop being a neutral facilitator, which in my opinion is just determining what your values are and deciding to live and embody those values. And not just something from a professional field, but also like in your own personal life. How do you live truthfully and authentically to who you are and what you stand for in your limited time in this planet? I think it's very crucial. So, of course, change is a process of the group and the collective, but I think it's very important that to bring into the conversation that change is also at an individual level. Another approach we can look into creating change is like, instead of seeking, we must seek shift and depth and not just only large scale solutions, which I think the current system is very driven towards, like creating things large scale, send them to everywhere in the world. But why don't we just focus on actually creating change? If you have a small group of 10, 15 people, the repercussions of that deep change are going to be rippling in so many other areas. And then finally, how do we design inaction? I think at least here in the West, we are so normalized from going to home to going to the office, going back home, etc. And then it is in the office where we are trying to create problems from communities or spaces we don't even understand. So how through our practices we can start engaging with the people that are directly influenced by our designs? How do we create a real relationship? How do we iterate in real time instead of like creating a 2-month process where we're just designing instead of working hand in hand and co-creating with the communities or cultures that are implicated in this context? So to close this, well, maybe this is more towards the end, but I'm just going to share these questions now. If we could go to the next slide, please. So maybe some questions to spark some reflection among everyone is, what is the current worldview you are working from? What is a radical alternative purpose for the system you are working in? And how can you frame your work differently? What can you create that creates properties, relationships, or values that allows for interventions to emerge? And how can you bring together an ecosystem of different organizations connected together to create new possibilities? And to all this, I also wanted to include the many different resources and organizations that have helped me in this trajectory. And this is a presentation I did actually in February. So we're in September now. So I included Indigenizing design because I really think what you guys are doing is exceptional, and there should be so many more conversations like the ones we are having right now. But because of these organizations, I have learned how to shift my practice a lot. So maybe you could take it for your own time, read through it, learn from them. They really have very valuable material, frameworks, communities, so much going on that can drive for change. And I also wanted to bring to the table an example of a work I did in my own practice as a student that maybe exemplifies better everything that I talked about. So if we could perhaps play, oh yeah, and this is just another framework that I really value. And I think if you have the time to go through it, it's very radical and it really grounds you in how to do the change. And it's called System Shift in Design for anyone who's interested. Okay, so before we play the video, I just want to contextualize what I was doing. So for a class called Techno-Social Encounters, we had to create an experience, an installation, a design, whatever really, that's meant to rationalize or at least be critical of the relationship between human and technology. And what I decided to do is like the role of technology in understanding indigenous identity and indigenous histories. So what I did was create a speculative museum. It's called World Heritage Museum 2050, of how museums would exhibit history from a Western point of view if everything is left to the hands of AI. So we can start playing the video. So basically what I created is an installation that people can either go in, and I had, in this case, I had the history of two places, Costa Rica and Palestine. And then people were decided to choose either to go uncomfortable or uncomfortable. Yeah, I think this was the previous video I sent, and it's a short version one. There was another version of the video that was a bit longer, but that's okay. If you don't have the bandwidth for it, I can just explain what I did. So I basically put people to choose to pass into learning history. Do you want to learn about history through the comfortable, curated way? Or do you want to learn history through the reality, which is far more uncomfortable? So when people would choose the uncomfortable path, they would, for example, in the case of Palestine, they would be learning about the real history of everything that has happened in Palestine since ancient times to like more modern history, like the Nakba, and of course everything that's happening in Gaza now. And then it would show them like a curated, not a curated version, but like the ways in which it's so easily to change and distort these images of people that are in pain, that they have just been bombed, that they have lost their homes, that they have lost their family members. And what I did was go through a very simple free AI image generator, and I put one of these very dark and gruesome images, and I just told AI, please make this a more comfortable version or a happy version. And AI, literally like in 10 seconds, without questioning anything, created new images that instead of people that were asking for food and were in suffering and were in loss, they changed this expression of sadness. They changed it to an expression of joy without questioning. And then from this, I decided to create AI generated videos that would create perception of history. And that's the thing. This is not something of 2050. This is something that is already happening because I did these videos in February of this year, and the videos themselves, they already have the biases. They are already telling the stories from those that are creating the narratives. And unfortunately, because of how things are created, these narratives usually come from the West. And because they come from the West, they tend to be money driven. Of course, we cannot generalize, and I myself will live in the West, and there's so many people here living in the West wanting to do change. But these are just the systematic patterns that we have had for decades. So yeah, this is just an example of something that I did, that I just hope to incite some reflection on the participants of the installation that I had that day, and of course with everyone here in this conversation today. But there are so many other ways to bring change from a design perspective, be it user experience design, being design research, be it graphic design. And yeah, academia definitely has a very big role on of what they introduce us as students we are so eager to learn. And at least here in the Netherlands, we come from all over the world to learn. I have friends from literally all parts of the world that we all met here because we had the same drive and purpose of learning about design. But how can academia support us in doing things differently? I think it's where I would like to steer the conversation and bring everyone's voices back in.
That's amazing. Thanks, Daniela. I just wonder initially, and it's unfortunately it appears we had the wrong version of the video there because it was pretty powerful, and it really does show us how incredibly quickly we have the tools of the future are changing the narratives. I wonder, just in terms of the pace of change, the controlling of the narrative, and how we still create authentic impact in our work. I wonder, Fetu and Carolina, if you want to maybe respond to Daniela.
I'm happy to go first this time, Caroline. We had some discussions in prep for this webinar, and they were super interesting to me because they encouraged me that the challenges and the journeys that we're all on, they're incredibly different, but equally there's some really there's some good similarities that we can use to help support each other through a trying time coming into the future. I think one of the big ones that I've noticed in my work with AI, and it speaks to what you were talking about, Daniela, is this. We phrased it as like a volume problem, and in the past, you were able to generate narratives from your community that were XYZ, and you were able to reinforce those with design, whether that's design through weaving, whether that's design through media, whether that's design through community design, and all the hundreds of other design methodologies you spoke to, Daniela. But importantly, like give my thoughts. Hang on. It's important to remember, but I've lost my thought actually. So to bring it back, I think it's important for us to recognize that those similarities with the volume problem. Sorry, the volume problem with AI. When the narratives get taken away from us, when we're in control and when we're able to design those narratives for ourselves, it's empowering. When we've got the tools to help empower and encourage and equip us to tell those designs better. So we're talking about dyes that took months to develop with Carolina. Some of our weavers now are using more modern designs, which allows them to iterate through colors and ideas much quicker. But with that comes kind of like a cost, right? And it comes a cost with disconnection with the environment that we're in, and disconnection with the conversation and the codes that come along with color selections in our design from nature. And so AI has got this it's a behemoth of ideas and junk if you're not careful, that's just going to potentially swallow the narratives that Indigenous peoples have. And Indigenous peoples are already minoritized in number through some horrid stuff in the past, but being such a smaller voice, we also have some of the biggest stories in the world. Like when you talk about culture, a lot of that conversation is being driven from Indigenous ideologies, methodologies, spiritual spaces, psychological spaces. And the risk here is that this powerhouse of culture has got the risk of being overwhelmed by a volume of conversation, of image, of whatnot. And it's not just external, by the way. As Indigenous people, we also have been marginalized in places like academia and commerce and economies and whatnot. And so when a lot of our peoples do find a way to get ahead, they use it. They use those methods, they use those spaces. And so there's a slight danger as well that our own people are going to contribute through platforms like AI to generate masses of of design and cultural sort of ideograms and whatnot that are void of the codification from our culture that should come along with it. And it becomes just, I think in Māoridom, we've got a thing called tāmoko, which is something that traditionally Māori would get as tattoos or body markings. And then when our kaita, which are our tattoo artists, give it to a non-Māori person, they call it kirituhi, which is basically skin drawings. And the concept there is that without being Māori, the skin drawings or the tattoos, they're not codified with the same knowledge. Whereas if you're Māori and get that tattoo is codified with your whānau, your whakapapa, your genealogy, your ancestors' kōrero, conversation and whatnot. And so AI has got this really sort of dangerous space, but at the same time, it's coming. It's not coming, as you said, Daniela. It's here.
It's here.
So as Indigenous people, how do we navigate this space? Like we navigated all the spaces before us. I often think about this fact. Māori people, 250, 300 years ago, were, and this might be hard to say out loud, but by definition, we were a Stone Age culture. And I don't mean that in the derogative way. I mean it in the sense that our technology was based around, stone, wood, materials such as flax and weaving and whatnot. And what encourages me is in that short 250 years, we've gone from that to having some of the most well-known, well-acclaimed humans on the planet in digital technologies, media arts, and more. And that encourages me that not only are Indigenous people have a history that goes back forever, and with that, a connection to everything that belongs to our history, we also have like a really strong demonstrable potential to navigate our future just as competently as our ancestors did. And just to loop back to what I said way at the start, I firmly believe that having a strong identity about who you are as an Indigenous person in your people and in your culture and in your lands is like the starting point for that. But yeah, that's my thoughts.
Okay, I think that it's quite beautiful what we are discussing right now, like how we can just participate and talk from our identities. I think it's quite crucial to talk about like what is the contribution that indigenous perspective can contribute to this digital future. I think it's what I find value is like, for example, indigenous relationality. How from this thinking, man is not always the center of the creation. So I think that is quite key because that is that carry in many indigenous ways of knowing. So it teaches us like a kind of how we can live in kinship with animals, with plants, with rock and mountains. And I think that indigenous communities also keep alive these kind of protocols and how this language can allow us to have more dialogue with no-human relatives, for example. And I think that matters because AI is not just codes. It came from stones, mines, and earth itself. So I think that we tend to ignore this materiality. So I think that break up the relationship actually. And when we form a relationship with AI, we are also forming relationship with exploited resources. So this is kind of key critical scope that can provide planetary understanding about our interconnection. And I think the second side is and I put that again, is the relationality, because I think saying for me, the indigenous people from millennia is saying like ultimately everything is interconnected. And I feel like it's true. I think that, there are many ways that people tend to generalize things. It's very easy to frame things in just one perspective. And it's something that is quite risky and it could be easily happen again. like a back then, like in the 18th century with Carlinian system, that we tend to frame all the nature by categorization and classification. But it's something that at that time, in the 18th century, it doesn't exist a lot of books. It doesn't exist a lot of people who actually they are able to read. Nowadays, we have a lot of information, but it's easily to be risky again to just fall down in the same kind of mistake. So I think homogenization is seen our societies is destroying our biodiversity. So I think instead of that, indigenous communities just show us and invite us to see the world as a much more interconnected system. And I think no humans are not inferior, but just as part of a kinship. And maybe for many people, it's quite difficult to understand this relation of kinship. That is just, we can approach AI in the same level, the same relation, and not seeing AI just through intelligence, but also through relations. Relations require ethics. I think that kinship is, at the end of the day, I think that shouldn't be fully understood, but maybe just it's just what we have and what binds us together.
Yeah. So interesting, because like for so many different indigenous communities around the world, even though they didn't know each other and they lived so far away one from each other, and I think even in Aotearoa, people weren't in contact until like, I don't know, not that long ago, right? Wetu? Like 300 years ago, maybe less, I don't know.
Yeah, not long ago at all. There was a couple of explorations, but for the major population, very recent.
Yeah. And so, for example, how come they are grounded in such similar values, same way as the people in Latin America were, same as the Samoa people, same as in African tribes, same as in Indian tribes, you know? It sometimes feels like human nature is more innate to see interconnectedness rather than not, but just because this narrative of separation and individualization has been so funded by money, systems, education, etc. It's kind of like by following these systems, we are kind of losing touch of ourselves and like our connection, like be it spiritual, be it our beliefs, be it our sense of collectivity and community. I think, and when you phrase it like, how can we bring like interconnectedness and real kinship between AI and make it connected with everything else? Like even I struggle to imagine. I have no idea. I have no idea how to do that because there's such polarizing things on both ends, like AI and indigenous knowledge. Like at first when we were gonna do this conversation, I really had to like sit down and reflect and think of like, okay, how do these two things connect? Because by just looking at them, it's very easy to see them like polarizing different aspects. And this is why this conversation is so important, because we need to keep having things that we think are so isolated and so modern and so nouveau and everything. They are also connected to and can be connected to this more ancestral type of knowledge. And I think our role as practitioners and people who are interested in change and want to see the change either for ourselves, for our grandchildren, just for love to the world and to nature. How do we envision this? How do we put this into practice? Yeah, and I hope everyone who's also watching is very inspired to do the same work as well, because it's fascinating, but it's also so important. It's crucial.
I just want to push off a little bit what you said there. In a lot of the stuff we're doing with AI, I try to be as like pragmatic as I can with AI because it really is a tool ultimately. But I love the idea of kinship and interconnectedness you have with it. One of my good friends, Dan Walker, spoke to the whakapapa of AI, which is like the genealogy or the synthesis of how it came to be. So if we think about ourselves as individuals, how did we get here? Well, we were made up of millions of previous people, millions of previous discrete knowledge bases, millions of people's discrete experiences have filtered down to become us. We've been trained in that knowledge, and so he was seeing AI as another distillation of that sort of experience and knowledge, albeit with all the guardrails off, and as you said, Carolina, like with that conversation comes conversation of ethics, and you can't have one without the other without there being a huge amount of danger involved. But also, Carolina, you were speaking about, I love it. I love this idea of we have a relationship with our environment and how AI is more than just intelligence. It's, the material, the resource burden, and potentially the resource benefit, potentially somewhere down the track. Much the same way as, say, flax is, right? So in flax in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have harakeke, which is flax, and we do a lot of weaving. And we've got to juggle that balance between resource costs, about what we take against the benefit that it provides us as a people to be less damaging to the environments around us. And so with AI, that relationship we have with it, and I love this idea that it is, that you can have a relationship with it. But I sometimes wonder whether the relationship with that it provides back to us is as important as the relationship that we on our side forge with it. So I watch some of my tamariki or my children, and I watch some of my friends who use also AI for things like coding, and they will talk to it like a person, obviously. But this entity, this thing that's talking back to them, is infinitely patient. It doesn't have the emotional up and down. It doesn't have the depth of, sort of human kind of pushback on it in it. And so our children can very easily run away with themselves, and essentially abuse these intelligences with almost no kind of social context and social kind of norms to bring them, into a place. And so for me, I'm not even too, I know I shouldn't say that. I worry that the AI's relationship with us is much less important, very much less important than how we are developing as beings with this kind of new type of alien conversation that we're having. And so you talked about art, generating those images. That's a whole nother language set that has exploded onto us with social media. With fake media and fake news and alternative news, and we know how hard that has been to juggle as a society. Just the tangible impacts that we will have from that kind of relationship we will build with whatever kind of news and whatever kind of images that we want to consume, because like you said, it's a comfortable version. So definitely, absolutely adore the conversation of kinship with these technologies and materials.
Well, I just want to jump in there and say thank you for basically all asking yourselves and answering the question that I was going to ask next, which was exactly just following on about that interconnectedness. And I love the way that you've been kind of, reflecting on the fact that I think from a Western perspective, we do see us as humans as being the most important thing. And we're really worried when something comes up like AI, which appears to be, from a capitalist point of view anyway, taking away our jobs, because that's how we, from a Western perspective, that's our identity. So I really love that whakaaro from you all, that kind of thinking around that, looking back to those generations of identity and who we are. And I think one of the things that you had, one of your circles was post-human design, Daniela, and I feel and you talked about also that relationship for the nature of kinship, Carolina. And I think that's, if we just think of this is just another one of the elements that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, like the wind and the sun and the mountains, that I think it's a really it makes it way less scary. I know we've probably got 15 minutes left, and I just want to quickly throw out to anyone who's watching, if there's any questions that anyone has. We probably do have time for questions from the audience as well, maybe one or two. Otherwise, if there's, I don't know, do you want to reflect, Lucy? Were there any of the other questions that we'd kind of lined up? But I feel like you've already kind of made your way through most of those things, thinking about the interconnectedness. You've kind of touched on maybe the ethics and needing to be mindful about, you know, the really scary stuff, as you've just said, Fetu. Over to you, Lucy.
Absolutely. It's a recurrent theme that comes across all wānanga that seem to, or all discussions that enter into these spaces of indigenizing or re-indigenizing or decolonizing, but particularly the interconnectedness of all things, and this way that we as Indigenous peoples typically see the world through these hyper-connected lenses, and that we kind of have difficulty kind of seeing the world in these siloed, categorized, codified, more Western kind of frameworks. But something that sort of just kind of popped up to me and sort of got me kind of excited, but also again with that teetering of fear, is in a such a post-truth world, in a world where everyone has access to their own curated version of events in their phone, in their pocket, at any given time of the day. You know, an environment online that is highly tailored towards their interests or their needs or their backgrounds, one that becomes an echo chamber. And also a world in which we're seeing the rise of AI creating art, creating music, creating film. It seems to me that the thing that is sacrosanct is craft. It is the way that human beings work with our digits, not in a digital framework, but work with our digits in a tactile, three-dimensional sense, that carries a lot of kind of weight, because it's something that has a thread from the past and towards the future, and we as a practitioner are just sort of the hands that are sewing these thoughts or these ideas together in the present moment, but in this sort of longer expanse of time. Time is also something that I could get into as well, but I'm glad that our discussion has touched on the importance of time in Indigenous practitionership, and the ways that we see the world, because we're standing in the present with our eyes fixed on the past as we're walking into the future, and so it's often a different kind of multi-time space universe kind of way of looking at things. I think that we may have just had a question pop up in our Q&A. So I'd like to thank you, Gigi, for this wonderful partai. Gigi says, kia ora koutou. Firstly, a big mihi to all of you for this inspiring and interesting kōrero. Your question is based around the kōrero or dialogue of kinship. So coming back to kinship, Carolina, as you elicited earlier, and specifically kinship with being responsible guardians or kaitiaki of our land as Indigenous peoples. And how do we find balance between the value of what we are using AI to create versus the impact or the degradation we know it has on our land, our why, our water use? So I'd like to just leave that to the floor. I'll give you a moment to percolate, and if anyone wants to enter in the space, please come and answer Gigi's wonderful question.
Okay, I think that it's like, thanks for the question. And I feel like, I think it's quite difficult to find a balance, of course. But I think it's a huge challenge that we should embrace as everything AI is happening in this reality. But I think that something that it's became very strong is like this kinship with humans have with the tools. And I think we tend to just detach technology from culture, because, for example, all that we understood as a traditional system are full of what we might call algorithmic thinking. For example, if you break it down, an algorithm is just a step-by-step process that takes an input and turns into more efficiently way. So it's important to think that algorithmic thinking is in everyday practices. And it depends on the way people develop different methods and strategies to just solve problems. And I feel like technology needs this kind of history, no? Talk about the history of technology, like where it comes from, that idea of algorithmic thinking. And there is like one author that talk about that, is Matteo Pasquinelli, for example. He talks about social algorithm. And he emphasized that is actually emphasizing the way how we embody knowledge and how this knowledge gets passed down through practices and rituals rather than written or any formalized language. So it's like a set of instruction that actually is embedded in the way people perform and transmit knowledge through demonstration on oral tradition. And I think like a huge example of that, and I think I explained that before in our previous meeting, is like this old technique that is called harvesting water, and it's like a very old technique that is preserved since pre-Columbian times and is based in the communal work of Ayu, which is a traditional Andean form of community. And the technique itself is quite fascinating because it's like creating small lakes, but collecting rainwater by planting certain local plants. So what they use it is one plant that is called putaca, and they call it like a color water. So these plants, along with other kind of ancestral farming methods, helps to channel the water from the high parts of the mountains down to the areas closer to the village. Up to today, this practice is alive, but I think that it's a cross use from different Ayus and help to use it in agriculture, but also in livestock. So it's not just a technical activity, as you see, it's just rituals and festivities are also part of that process. And so bring together like both practical and cultural dimensions into community. So what I find important here is like how design incorporate these different elements like knowledge, technology, and tradition, and think this how it works in a balance with nature. So I think this shows us like plants are not categorized as just natural resources that we can extract, but instead it's like a companions, no? Plants as companions. And I think this is quite way to inspire how we can see AI. It's like another companion. And if we can see tools like AI as another tool that you can join, but because at the end of the day, AI works because you put a lot of information there. The human need to just full up with a lot of data, and that creates like an algorithm and maybe some kind of solve problem. And yeah, I think that this is a way at least that we can be inspire how we can treat or we can use it and try to find a balance, no? Because I want to do the comparison between plants and AI. I hope that can answer the question, at least.
Fetu, Daniela, did you have a response to that before we close?
I think Carolina explained it wonderfully. But I think also Claire had a comment.
Mm-mm. Just seeing actually both the comments. Just very quickly, our people, indigenous people aren't magical. We're not elves. We're not mystical beings. We're very much humans who have like really tangible, real, up and down relationships with our environment. And so most of Indigenous cultures have gone into unique new environments and have had to work out how they fit, work out what their impact is on that environment, and then create traditions and stories and narratives that help them live better in that environment. And I really feel like that with AI, it's an upcoming sort of technology, but Indigenous people are uniquely equipped to pause and listen and see the damage it has on the environment and speak out about it. Speak out about it against commercial, you know, practices, commercial goals and values. So I definitely do think that we have a role in that as Indigenous people to address it. But my hope is that the world in general picks up on this as well, which I am kind of hopefully seeing. And Claire, this conversation about AI with the assignments is and like almost like the cognitive liftoff, you know, of us as people, and sort of we're like, oh, we don't have to do that anymore because this thing over here does it. That is like such a rich conversation to have. I encourage us all to like think about it going forward. Maybe it's another webinar conversation. That is such a huge impact coming up in our futures. Like my tamariki, you know, what does seeking information look like? My generation, we fell face first into Googling. I'll just Google it. But this new generation are falling into a world where it's more than Google. It's something else. One of my nephews has been teaching himself programming straight off ChatGPT, using it as a teacher, which is like cool, a cool way to use it. But yeah, that's my thoughts. And you, Daniela, you probably see this a lot as well in design, I imagine, in UX and UI, like the impingement of like AI coming through.
Yes, definitely. Especially because when I was doing my program, the first year we had no ChatGPT, and then like there was like a boom of ChatGPT, like in I don't know, it was like October 2022 or something like that, and then everyone was using it, and it's as one like as a designer, it's when you're collaborating with others, it also makes it harder because there's people that decide to abstain from it, and then there's people that decide to use it as a tool, but then there's also people who just decide to do everything through it. So it also creates silos, like in conversation, like what, for example, you could have very different problems or design cases, but with the use of ChatGPT, you always somehow end up like in the same solution, because so you have the same solution for many different problems. And that's something that I saw a lot. And again, talking about academia again, it's also like it's so much about the environment you're in and how you're fostered to use these tools, the role that these tools have, but also like the importance of being critical. I think just critical exercises for the mind is just something that we as a whole we must not lose, because that's our rationality. I feel like our ability to be critical.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you, Claire, for that final question. I think it kind of, as you said, Fitu, it could be the start of the next series of webinars. 2026, here we come. We are kind of out of time now, so I will very quickly hand that back over to Lucy just to close. I won't take up too much time, aside from the fact that I think we have, as you mentioned, Fitu, we've kind of ventured into some kind of new environments, and I don't think we've kind of created any new traditions in the 90 minutes, but I think hopefully we've made or created some space for us to all think a little bit more deeply about some of these really, really complex and challenging things that we're navigating through. So back over to you, Lucy. And I'm just personally, I just want to say a special thank you to everybody who's been a part of these series. There's a bunch of people sitting behind these screens here whose faces aren't showing. In particular, Sarah, Gemma, Anna, John. There's a long list. So just a big thank you to everyone who made the panel happen. And we look forward to what comes next. Kia ora.
Kia ora hoa. Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for your attention today as we explore some quite diverse topics, some really interconnected but also disparate ideas that span space and time. So it gets a little bit metacognitive all of a sudden, doesn't it? But I guess that's sort of indicative of the way that we as Indigenous people view the world, is it does all get a little bit connected all together. But I do feel, rest assured, I feel like our future mokopuna are in good hands, because people like yourselves are wonderful speakers. So yeah, thank you so much, Daniela, Fetu, Carolina, for your time and for your expertise and your generosity, because it's through sharing stories like these that we can have a collective aspiration for a better future. And it's also through hearing about tangible, practical steps and your experiences as creative practitioners that you've had in the past. It gives us sort of a roadmap as to how to maybe potentially get there. And I guess one of the best things that we know that we can do is be steadfast and strong in our Indigenous identities. But also, if we're not Indigenous, we can support our Indigenous brothers and sisters and cousins, because there's a lot to be said for navigating this confusing, dystopic, mystical future together from an Indigenous perspective. So I thank you all for your collective heart, your courage and your tenacity to continue to do the work that you do, because ultimately it's through your mahi, through your work, that we're going to reach that aspirational future. I could prattle on until the cows come home, but I just want to kind of close us up with a huge mahi, a massive thank you to everyone who's been involved. Just to echo John's thanks to everyone who's been a part of this series, our other co-hosts, Cater and Johnson, who have been involved earlier on, our incredible speakers over the cast of 6 webinars, and all of our supporters and our listeners and the people that have been tuning in along the way. It's been an amazing journey. We really hope that we can continue this webinar series with a series 2, and it looks like we've got plenty to talk about, lots of different themes that deserve to be unpacked with other amazing like-minded individuals. So to kind of close us up there, I'd like to offer you all a closing karakia. This karakia speaks to enlightenment and the acquisition of knowledge and understanding. Kia karakia tātou. Pau hihiri, pau rārama, pau o te whakaro, pau o te tangata, pau o te aroha, te pau I here nei I a tātou, mauri ora ki a tātou, humie huie tai kie. Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. We're very grateful that you've tuned into this incredible kōrero conversation today. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the wonderful aspirational future. I'll get, if I could ask the speakers to please stay involved on the call.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.